Welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience, a place for leaders to get inspired, be challenged, and grow. I am your host, Rashad Oberlander. Let's get started. Today's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience is brought to you by my 7-day Leadership Growth Challenge. It's a free challenge that I've created, and it's delivered by email over the course of 7 days. I've created 7 compelling questions to challenge various aspects of your leadership, the way you lead, and why you lead. Go to rashadoberlander.com and scroll down until you find the 7-day leadership challenge, or look for the link in the show notes. Over the last few weeks, I have been sharing some ratings and reviews that my listeners have been sending in. If you have not already, would you consider going over to Apple Podcasts, subscribing, leaving me a rating, and leaving me a review, as well as sharing with a friend? This helps the podcast grow and gets the word out there. Today's review comes from To and Fro. Appreciated the honesty and the reflection. These are 2 must-haves in leadership. 5 stars. I appreciate this review. It's really nice and simple. Thank you so much for taking the time to leave that review. And now, on with today's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming to the show Mr. Mark Anielski. Mark is President and Chief WellBeing Officer of Anielski Management Inc. And Mark is also the Chief WellBeing Economist with the Indigenomics Institute. Mark has authored 2 books, An Economy of Wellbeing, Common Sense Tools for Building Genuine Wealth and Happiness, the award-winning book, The Economics of Happiness. Mark's work has taken him all over the world as he advises communities and countries on integrating well-being analytics into conventional economic cost-benefit analysis, strategic planning, budgeting, and impact investment decision-making. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Rashad.
I'm excited to have you here. Your introduction's a little bit of a mouthful for me. Some of those terms are
oh my goodness, there's too many words. Yeah, as my daughter says, why don't you just stop talking?
Well, I mean, from my brief introduction to economics in college, I recognize some of the concepts there, but as my professor was fond of saying, all other things being equal.
Certus paribus, some Latin word.
Exactly. So I'm excited to have you here, and I always like to start with a little bit more about my guests. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and what got you to where you are today.
Well, when I was 21, I started articling with Coopers and Lybrand, which is now PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. So my original idea was chartered accounting, and I quickly realized auditing was really boring. But I learned enough about accounting, which I'll talk about later. Then I loved the outdoors, so I went into forestry of all things and got my 2nd degree in forest science at the University of Alberta, and then joined the government as the forest economist for the province. So that work involved trying to value nature and put a monetary valuation on non-market things, and eventually did my master's in forest economics. So I've got this 3 degrees, all from the U of A. I was always interested in, the valuation of things that were complicated, like wildlife and parks and things like that. And when I was in Alberta Finance, or which now Alberta Treasury, when Ralph Klein was premier, I was working in the unit called Performance Measurement, and we wrote the government's first business plan, and we're steeped in measuring performance or measuring impacts of government policy. And it was there that I gained sort of insights into the flaws in how we measure progress, and namely gross domestic product, GDP, the primary measure of economic progress economists use, and started to think about, well, how do we measure, as Robert Kennedy once said, can we start to measure the things that make life worthwhile, including happiness? So happiness was not even on in my thoughts when I wrote the book, The Economics of Happiness, because my thoughts were around developing a new accounting system that would measure well-being, because the word wealth comes from the Old English word, means the conditions of well-being, which kind of blew me away. I didn't learn that in economics or
No kidding.
forestry. And then the word economy means household stewardship, and competition means to strive together from the Latin, and education means to draw forth what's already within you from the Latin. So all these words that we use, we're commonly using, we're actually, they're speaking a truth, but we don't understand their origins. So for me, it was like putting Humpty back together again, saying, well, how do we redesign everything, basically, the economic system, the accounting systems we have relied on for hundreds of years, and how do we orient our economy towards well-being and happiness? By the way, in Greek, means the well-being of your spirit, well-being of your soul. That's what oidaimonia means. So we have well-being a common thread through all of these, all this language in business and economics. And so I said, well, let's get on with it. If we're going to be, your theme is leadership, how are we going to lead our country, our cities, along this more compelling path of well-being, rather than just material, growth, GDP growth, more money changing hands economy, which has been around since World War II. So that's kind of been my motivation, my passion. I also am a student of monetary policy and how money gets created, which is really my obsession, because the thing is insane when you stop to study it and how what money really is. So that's my long journey, so yeah, 40 years on, I'm still passionate about accounting, real accounting,
Yeah,
real measurement.
sure. And with your work that you're talking about in terms of, well-being economics and the economics of happiness, what do those things mean? What is it that you're looking at, and how do we help the listener understand? Because I think economics in the mind of the listener is like you say, monetary policy and cost benefit analysis, and those kind of traditional concepts of economics. So where is well-being and happiness playing into this?
So, I could say well-being or happiness is well-being of your spirit. And you say, well, how are you going to measure well-being of my spirit or my soul? Well, that's going to be very difficult. But, we do rely on statistics to measure all kinds of things, health and diet and air quality, things like that. So what I've developed is a model I call genuine wealth, which genuine means to live according to your values, to be authentic. So combined with the word wealth, we have measuring the things that contribute to, in a sense, your happiness, your well-being, your household's well-being. And so that model, genuine wealth, can apply at the individual level. So you can imagine your household saying, well, are we pursuing a life of well-being, or are we stuck in the kind of mortgage rut? The word mortgage means a death pledge in French. People always laugh when I say that. I said, well, the French don't even use that word anymore. The English continue to use the death pledge word. So in a way, we're all, we're sort of stuck in this debt, right? A conundrum. It turns out also the happiness curve in life, or life satisfaction curve, it runs like a smiley face. You're happiest till you're about 12, and then you start falling, and you kind of bottom out around 43, 45 years of age, and then you get happier again as you age. So that's interesting. So this idea of pursuing a life, or a life in a household, or whatever, a relationship of well-being, including in the business world, is actually possible. So you can imagine your business running on the principles of, are my employees happy in this truest sense, or what is their well-being condition? And when I talk about well-being, I talk about the notion of the indigenous medicine wheel. So mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being are the four balanced components of your well-being wheel. And then I could scale this whole well-being concept up to the community level, to the municipal level, to the provincial level, to the national level. And all the way all these nested accounting systems are all, in a sense, measuring well-being at different scales, from the individual all the way up to even a watershed or a national scale. And then all that well-being data which is measured both using subjective surveys on quality of life, the surveys, questions I've been asking, everything from life satisfaction to trust of your neighbor. They go into kind of the qualitative, subjective side of the accounts. And then the other part is all the objective data that we've been collecting regularly, from life expectancy to cancer rates to, GDP and wages and all those other, there's hundreds and hundreds of data sets, right, that we think are important to defining our economic progress. And so you put all that together and you get a different scorecard. It's almost like it's like a broader medical checkup, if you like, of the patient.
Right. So essentially you're looking for a more well-rounded picture of someone's life in total, not just simple data points like income and, kind of the basic demographic type data.
Yeah. I know that listeners can't see, but you have, old record discs behind you. And when I present data in the form of a circle. So you've got, say, 50 data points that are connected to the science of well-being, let's say. They define what it means to have a rounded life. And those data points can be represented in the form of in Excel. It's called a radar graph. So it can show you the imbalance or balance or harmony of the various attributes of well-being of your life on an individual level, but also at a larger scale societal level.
Right.
And the image is pretty compelling. It just says, hey, like these areas are lagging and these areas, GDP is always maxed out, right? But what about opioid use or depression or, suicide or, those are all lagging negative indicators, but those are also important to defining how well off a society is and feels.
Yeah, certainly. It's something that is occurring to me is that, there's a lot of information and focus out there in the business world right now on, work-life integration or balance, depending on what word you want to use, and having the sense of well-being and health and wellness and those types of things. And they're very, at times, ambiguous kind of ideas. It's like, well, how do you know if someone actually is satisfied with their work-life balance or integration, or how well are they? How well are they doing? So, is your work something that is going to come into more mainstream, like what we are trying to accomplish in the workplace? Are people able to tap into resources like what you're doing to really begin to understand how their employees or how their teams or communities are doing in this sense?
Because there's this joke that accountants use a rear view mirror to drive the vehicle, and economists like to look through the front windshield and predict the future. So I think we need a combination. If my work is in a way, baselining, like what's the state of well-being of employees in the workplace right now. So I have applied a model to do that. The question of, okay, so, how is that distribution of well-being look within the team, right? And it gets tricky because you don't want to be prescriptive and you don't want to get into too deeply into like spiritual things, for example, which is, again, the term happiness. So that's not necessarily the purview of the workplace to deliver happiness, right? In that sense. But I think the data shows that workplaces where people have a strong sense of meaningfulness from the work, right? They just feel better. They perform better. Their sick days are lower. Their productivity is higher. They just accomplish more. They have a state of feeling of flourishing, right? And not everyone can say that about the job. Actually, too few Canadians find their work meaningful. I think it's something like 13% of Canadians, according to Gallup, said their work actually brings them meaning, which is shocking.
Yeah.
That's an indictment of our workplace. That why is it? I mean, we're not all cleaning toilets. No one really wants to clean toilets, but we all do at home, right? So presumably, unless you have a housekeeper. And I don't want to, I'm not a mechanic. I can't fix my vehicle. So I need someone who's more passionate about fixing cars, and I'm passionate about numbers and looking at efficiency and weird things like that. So I think, again, applying that well-being concept in the workplace and also to the customer relationship, because the relationship with the customer is everything, right? We know that, we say that, but how do you know that the customers are actually happy, satisfied with your service? Do you ask them, or do you just hire a pollster to do it? Or, so the relationship you have with others is an asset. It's a form of an asset. And trust is a form of an asset. So all these things are these so-called intangibles. You can't say that they're not, they can be measured. And I've learned that when you do actually ask some of these questions, people are shocked. It's like, no one ever asked me about the relationship, right? And yet, as a consultant, a relationship's everything. If you don't have a happy client, you don't have retainer work later down the road. So all these things, so pay attention to those things, those intangibles that are critical. And certainly your employee, like low turnover rate to me is a sign that your workplace is a good place to work, right?
Right.
That, to me, that's what I always look for. And we know in certain businesses, like restaurant business, there's high turnover rates and staff. And so anyways, those are some of the things that the science of happiness.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I have to assume that these concepts you speak of, as you mentioned before, are not something you learn in formal education.
No, you did not.
And so you sort of alluded to some of the things you mentioned earlier, like kind of coming to a realization of what some of the words that we use in our English language actually originate from. But what led you to the conclusions that you're talking about in terms of well-being economics and the economics of happiness?
Well, it was just, I began my first book with that childlike question, our kids irritate us and they ask the why question. But I started to play that as it was when I opened the etymological dictionary. It's even hard to say that word, but the origins of word dictionary, because English is an interesting language and it has Latin roots and Greek, all these roots. So if you open that up, and you can download the app on your phone, it's pretty cool. And you start looking at the origins of these words, and you're saying, wait, so everything I was taught in economics, even, the behavior of a consumer, like utility maximum, like, stop a minute, what does the utility mean? What is a util? What if util is a unit of happiness or well-being, right? How come Adam Smith never defined the word wealth ever in his entire work, The Wealth of Nations? Never defined it according to the English. I always joke because he was Scottish, he couldn't admit that the English had it right. But it's unbelievable. Like, you have these seminal books that have shaped capitalism, and even the word capitalism or capital, it's actually a close cousin to the word wealth. So the more I looked into the origins of these words that we used or were taught, and then again you rediscover their truth, you're like, wait a minute, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater necessarily. We don't need to throw accounting out just because. You think about why do debits have to equals credit? Like, that comes from sacred geometry and Fibonacci, which Leonardo da Vinci and Luca Pacioli, who developed the accounting system in the late 15th century, right, had developed based on an understanding of sacred geometry. And so that suddenly became the primary accounting structure that we still use today. So those stories I just shared with you, never learned them in accounting class. Learn how to balance the books, learn how to, you learn little tricks about why things are 1 cent out, 7 cents out. But nothing about the origins, the story of, imagine Luca Pacioli and Leonardo da Vinci, right? Talking about why this was relevant to Venetian bankers and business people. Yeah. Anyways, that's part of my story. Just keep asking why.
Right.
And because you never had the chance in class, or the professor said, just take a look. If you don't memorize this stuff, you're not going to pass.
Right.
So don't ask those tough questions. That's usually what happens.
Mm.
And even in graduate school, you still never ask those questions.
So it was just really a journey of asking why and kind of peeling back the curtain on kind of the origin of things.
Yeah.
Opened up
if your
some
kid
really
asks you,
interesting
well,
questions.
why can't we afford it? Well, I don't make enough money. Well, why don't you make enough money? Why don't you make as much money as that person over there who has a nice Mercedes out front? Well, I'm not a doctor. I'm a mechanic. Well, how come you're not a doctor? This keeps going on and on. Because I made a choice, or maybe I wasn't smart enough, but that actually has very little to do with happiness. I mean, the science says that a certain threshold of income is sufficient for a level of happiness, beyond which having more money actually sometimes brings less happiness.
Right.
So those are the things that people don't realize. If I say, $75,000 is an optimum level of income for any household in Alberta or Canada for a pretty happy life.
Yeah.
No, it can't be. It's like, well, you can check the numbers. I've got the same number, I've got the numbers and the statistics show that. So how's it the Albertans who earn about $100,000 on average household income aren't happier than people in PEI or Sherbrooke, Quebec, right? It's like much lower incomes. It's like, so then it gets into this whole thing like, well, do we live this life of entitlement, of, we privilege, if we define our lives with a lower income, then are we countercultural? Can we limit our own income to that level I talked about? And actually what you end up having is, I discovered, you actually have more time in the end. You have more discretionary time because you're not working, especially when your debts are paid off. So those are all part of the personal advice. If I have any advice as a macroeconomist, is, you can design a happy life. You can design that happy wage. Just have to be disciplined and creative about it.
I think it opens up a lot of interesting questions about one's own path in life and what success is in the personal journey. Like there's a lot of keeping up with the Joneses and pursuit of the almighty dollar, and particularly in, I would say, Western, economies where, old world economies and, countries where the average income is significantly less, that values are often quite different to what we would, see as normal in our world. And it kind of shifts the perspective. And I think the listeners maybe could be asking themselves some interesting questions about, what is it that makes one happy and what is contributing to their well-being right now.
Yeah. And I do find it interesting because it depends on who I'm talking to. Like if I'm talking to a 20-year-old, like our daughters, or I'm talking to my parents who are in their 80s, right? It's like, that relationship with money changes over time, right? The material things don't matter as much anymore as you get older. So again, at that bottom of the happiness curve, if I'm talking to 40-year-olds, I'm like, okay, you're okay. I bet you I can guess what you're going through. Your teenage kids are driving you crazy, right? You may be even thinking of a midlife crisis or separation, right? Because maybe the kids are old enough now. It's like, okay, we're done. Our project is done. And guess what? Divorce rates happen then, right? And so all these things, you can almost predict your life path. And I said, well, what if you could navigate that a little more smoothly? What if you actually kind of knew that at 45, you would probably face these challenges? But when you're 20, you're like, those are my parents. They're old and whatever. But when you actually look back across the valley, right, you think, gee, if I had given my 8-year-old Mark some advice, maybe I would have done something a little different, maybe. But maybe not. Maybe life just has to go that way. You have to run the path. You have to go through suffering. Suffering is also a good teacher. It's a good leadership teacher, right? So all those things, you can't just say, everything would be easier. And, there's certainly people in the world who have much less material things, but their smiles are more authentic. And right? And I think you and I have kind of Germanic background, so I got the German work ethic in spades, right?
Yeah.
But I also have an Austrian background, which says maybe not. Maybe you don't have to be perfectly on time like the German trains. We just, I'll just wait for finish my schnitzel and beer. And then, so, but it is interesting looking at different cultures. And like if I look at GDP and happiness, compare, relationships, you can show that Costa Rica has probably the optimized level of happiness and GDP. Even if Alberta's way out there with Luxembourg, high GDP, pretty decent levels of happiness, but not for as many dollars as Costa Rica needs, right, to achieve the same level of self-rated happiness. You're like, well, could we live like the Costa Ricans on 1/10 of what Alberta needs for its GDP? Man, that would be a hard conversation, Alberta, I can tell you.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing is like, and materialism does actually corrupt it. I look at the Bhutanese, the young people are saying, Bhutan's the gross national happiness place, right, on the planet. And they too experience the seduction, if you like, or the corruption of materialism, right? The Western, look at all the nice things they have, and they must be happier, right? And you talk to a 20-year-old New York, and you're like, well, gee, maybe I wouldn't mind wearing the same clothes every day and being a Buddhist, maybe, right? Like they do in Bhutan. So,
yeah, sort of like it's sort of the Instagram life. It's that appeal and kind of deception of what's actually real.
Yeah. So, and then of course that gets into deeper, like there's a spiritual journey that all of us, I think, go through at some point, right? It's like you got to dig deep. Like, why am I here on this planet, right? Am I here to pay a mortgage and just slide by and, or maybe I had some Disney vision of what I could be, but I haven't gotten to the real heart of what is it that brings me joy and, gets me up in the morning.
Some interesting thoughts and some interesting questions I think we all have to face at some point. These principles that we're talking about, how do we apply them to our workplaces, and what can leaders do to enhance the well-being and happiness of their employees?
Well, I think leaders. I think leaders are stewards. I mean, the word economy means stewardship. So, as a leader, I think you have a responsibility, I would say, to at least enable the pursuit of happiness for your employees, just like enabling the well-being of your children. Your children really aren't your own in a way. If you're a parent, you know what I'm saying. But I can enable their mental and physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being as a parent. In the workplace, I can enable, hopefully, I can be attentive to my employees in terms of how they're feeling and whether their work is bringing them meaning. Am I listening to, their suffering? Am I compassionate? So can I create a workplace of well-being is a question that I would want to encourage leaders to think about. Again, the slippery slope is I'm not responsible for your happiness. In the end, we all have volition or free will.
Right.
But I think we can and must create conditions in which people go to work, they're safe, they get some sense of joy from the work. Maybe not every day, of course not. Not every day is perfect. But at the end of the week, can we ask our staff, like, how was your week out of 10? And if you're hitting 8.2 every week, I think you're doing pretty well, right? But, one of my favorite potential clients, I say potential because it was an interesting relationship, was with my friend at Volvo, who is the owner. And I said, it's interesting. I think your service guys are the least happiest in the organization, and they're called service. And he said, what do you think we could do? I said, I don't know. I suspect I have an idea. I said, you have a really nice, beautiful showroom and a lovely, guest seating area and nice espresso machine, and all looks wonderful. But in the old days, you'd go to talk to Joe over the Coke machine, and Joe would tell you about his life and changing your oil or something. Maybe today you can't do that. You can't even walk in the back and see Joe, bring him donuts. Joe would be happy if you brought donuts today, right? And I'm like, there's something wrong. We've missed the most important part, which is relationships. That's what human beings are hardwired to do. So I think that would make service guys happier. Instead of, taking my credit card, giving me my keys back and giving me the big invoice and the bad news. And oh, by the way, sir, you should probably change your brake fluid like next month, which will be a $500 additional fee. I'm like, oh my God, like, why do I drive a vehicle? Anyway, that's just a storyline, but it's but it's relevant to the this whole customer relationship thing. And
well, and what you're saying is the responsibility of leaders in terms of enhancing well-being and happiness. It doesn't have to be measuring and surveying and kind of monitoring statistics necessarily, but just creating the conditions where the employees have the opportunity to be happy, where they can choose to be happy and well in the workplace.
Yeah.
And it can be as simple as that. And it can be as simple as, donuts for someone, or, a nice coffee machine or seating area or whatever, creating those conditions.
That's right. I think honestly, there's probably very few genuine good leaders. Maybe it's because we're not taught to be leaders. Certainly when I was in government, no one ever gave management classes or courses. Like suddenly you're the manager or the team leader, and you're like, I don't know, what do I know about leading a team? Maybe I was a soccer coach. Okay, that's team leadership. But like the skills, right? If you've gone from a technical position now to the leader, the manager, it's a whole different skill set. Now you have to like give up power. You want to enable your team to make you shine. And you have to be available to them in the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I mean, all of those, that's what I saw in good leadership when I witnessed it. But I've never been a manager. Of people say, oh, you'd make a good manager. It's like, why? Because I'm empathetic, because I listen. Maybe, but that's not something I was necessarily taught. It was just sort of innate. Yeah. But it does beg the question, what defines good leadership, or, servant leadership, all those new buzzwords today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, we could follow that rabbit trail quite a bit, but, I mean, it's definitely something that I've observed in my own career, and I've seen, lots of organizations can struggle with leadership development. Someone's a good salesperson, so we make them a manager. Well, just because they're great at sales doesn't mean they can lead a team, right?
That's right. That's right.
Just because they can lead a team doesn't mean they're a great salesperson. And, I mean, you can use that example across many different kind of parallels where, you're a great mechanic and you're not going to necessarily be a great service manager. Yeah. You're a great whatever, and you're not going to make a great leader in that way, right? Just because you perform well over here doesn't draw a straight line to great leadership. Yeah. And I think that
it isn't.
I'm gonna throw my own little theory out there and say that that's definitely a contributing factor of well-being and happiness in the workplace, is leaders who just simply don't know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Or, I just heard Malcolm Gladwell on, wrote The Tipping Point and other great books, and, on a podcast during COVID, he was talking about, for him, the best example of good team relationship is soccer, where everyone knows nobody, you can't win consistently with just one star. You need all the players playing their, like he said the weakest, the strength of a team is defined by the weakest person on the team, right? So That's why it's so important to have equal weight of capacity within the soccer team, versus you could have a superstar in basketball or whatever, right? Even in hockey to some degree. So I thought that was interesting for an image of a kind of cohesive team where that requires a good coach to identify, I need someone who's really patient in defense, doesn't get rattled when the forwards are coming and can still, release that ball or whatever it is, right? It's so it's interesting having watched, our daughter go through club soccer and seeing those kind of coaching characteristics in teams.
So at both the business and the personal level, how can we reconcile success with well-being and happiness?
Well, I think that's all very personal again. It comes down to your choice of what you define. I mean, if you were to define what brings you joy in life, right? I'll say, are you in touch with your joy, whatever you're doing, right? By joy, I think joy eclipses happiness. Joy is something that transcends happiness. And I think that's that sense of flourishing that whether you're playing music or, and you can literally have those moments through any part of your day. And I think also, you could get really, like I love spreadsheets and I can do full cost accounting on everything in the house, which I do. And, drives my wife crazy. It's like, no, I'm just passionate about where are we spending our money? In other words, where you're spending money means I'm spending my dollars earned, which was my life energy, to work for the money. So there's a direct relationship now between the hours I'm working, the choice of work, right? Where I choose to spend the money. Do I need a fancier car, or is my nice road bike sufficient, right, to get me to work and back or whatever? Do I need two cars? Do I need a bigger house, or are we satisfied with this house? And suddenly you can sort of basically curate this relationship between money and happiness fairly smoothly, right? To the point where, like I said, I have spreadsheets that can optimize your fixed asset capital account in your household, right? What's the life of your furnace? What's the life of your roof? And, I also ask people, do you know how much your monthly set aside rate should be to buy the next roof or car or dishwasher? And if I told you it's only like about $350 a month, and you say, really? I says, well, if you do the math, it's not that far off. But do you put the money aside every month? Not likely, because you're spending it. Because we spend as quickly as we make it, as a rule.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the statistics. So all these things are little things that I do personally, but for some that'd be like total overkill. But it makes, might drive my wife crazy, but gives me peace. So I can look at it and go, you know what? I can now see that we could retire or not. I'm at a point where I could retire, but I'm not tired. I'm not tired of contributing to the world. And as long as I have a few great clients, I'm going to just keep working until I can't work anymore.
Yeah.
So those are things. It's like, well, some people want to be done by 65 and golf every day. It would drive me crazy to golf every day. I don't even like golfing. So it's like, but biking, I'd buy another nice bike, right? So anyways, those are all like personal anecdotes.
Certainly. So it is very much a personal definition and kind of reconciliation then of happiness and well-being. And business-wise, though, turning profits and things like that, where's the balance there for the business owners listening, who want to make a bigger profit or grow their business or expand or whatever that focus might be. Like, do you see well-being and happiness taking away from that, or is it going to enable it?
I think it's the same. I don't care. Like, we're a family-owned business, and I'm the primary. We're equal shareholders, my wife and I. Mm-hmm. Which I don't know why that happened, but it did. It wasn't 51-49, believe me. But in any business, I mean, or you're a business leader, again, it comes down to, why am I in business? What is it? If you're the founder of a business, I don't care, whatever, you start a glass shop or something, or a restaurant. And often the failure sometimes of businesses is they think they can scale, like, buy the second business. And then oftentimes they're overextended. So there's always that balance. And then the question is, as the owner, like, what is a sufficient living wage for yourself? Like, if you think about, define that first. And that's, I think, your threshold of anxiety. Like, you're going to be anxious, of course, because you got mouths to feed. If you've got employees, I have a vision of a world without employees. I know it sounds crazy. No, all of us are artisans. Right? You're a mechanic. You're an artisan. You might work for Joe who owns the shop, but you're an artisan. You're like a stonemason, right? That got hired to build a cathedral, but you're fixing cars. So that model might be of interest to some people. A model of shared assets. So you have a cooperative business structure where, like Shando's Construction, which emerged as a cooperative, business enterprise where a carpenter has one share, one vote within the organization. So they have a say in how the whole company's run. They don't have primary ownership, but that's an interesting model. So, but again, the notion of how much do I personally need? I mean, if you say, well, I need to make $200,000. I'm the owner and I have a right. It's my business. I'm like, all right, but your employees are making $13 an hour. So do you know you're not paying your employees a living wage in Edmonton, which should be $17.50 an hour, roughly, right? So that sense of, like, what is my responsibility to pay a living wage to my staff? And if I can't pay a living wage, there's something wrong, I think, with my business model, right? Even if we agree that the boss can make 10 times what the employee, or I would say, I don't know if it's true, but I use a rule of Solomon, 7-1. That should be the right ratio, fair ratio. Yeah, I put a lot of sweat equity into building this thing, and you work for me, right? But now we also have a shared responsibility. And we've seen examples of business leaders who have done that, not 700-1 ratios that we often see, in these big companies, which is ridiculous, because they feel they're entitled, or some consultant told them that that's what their sector ratio is. And this is the problem with the growing inequality we're seeing. So anyways, those are all the kind of business model things that I've explored and taught about. And as I said, my conclusion was, I've tried different business models myself, partnerships, equal partnerships. At the end, it's like, I'm just happy being in my own shoes. And if we happen to do gigs together like good jazz musicians, we will get gigs. And if we don't get gigs, we weren't supposed to get gigs.
So people want to learn more about well-being economics, the economics of happiness, the work that you're engaged in, Mark. Where can they go? I know you have a couple of books. Where can they buy those books?
So the Economics of Happiness is only in ebook, like versions, so on Kindle and all that, or the library, or used. Of course, you can get them used. So it's out of print, physical print. Economy Wellbeing is and Economy Wellbeing is in print and from Amazon or bookstores or ebook. Perfect. And I've got my own podcast on economy wellbeing, little podcast where I invite guests to talk about these ideas. And so that's free, of course, on Spotify and Google Play and all the other platforms, and Apple Podcast. And so, yeah, and then Anielski.com is my corporate website. That's where I just have op-eds and stuff.
Cool. Good.
It needs a refresh, but otherwise it's
good. So I'll put some of those links in the show notes. So when you're listening to this podcast, check the detailed show notes on my website at rashadoberlander.com.
Right.
And I'll have some detailed links there for you to check out Mark's books on Kindle and Amazon, his podcast and his website. So tune in there. And as we wrap up here, Mark, a couple of final questions for you. A couple of questions I like to ask each of my guests on the show. What is one thing you know about life or leadership that you wish everyone knew?
My old wise friend, Orest Andre, who's passed, he was a marketing guy, and he always gave this jingle to me and drove me crazy after a while. But it's like, are you leading your life or just following it around? So that's the theme of leadership. Are you leading your life or just following it around? Right. Which is a pretty deep reflection. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's cool.
That's the only tip I have in life. Orest had lots of other tips, and he actually wrote them down. He called them Orestolian wisdom because his name was Orest. So he wasn't Aristotle, but
he played at it.
He would say, you know what? When you beat leukemia, which he did like 25 years ago, he said, when you wake up in the morning, every day is Christmas.
No kidding.
Yeah. When you're given a 6-month death sentence and you live another 25 or 30 years, you're like, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Final question. When it's all said and done, what 3 words do you want to be used to describe your life?
The path of love.
What do you mean by that?
I had another line, but that one that's my path.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could have talked about that, but I have a kind of superpower, passion, spiritual. Everyone has a spiritual story. So my spiritual story is about this path of love, which I think I could write another book called Building a Civilization of Love. And people like, that's a pretty heady word, flaky maybe, but for me, it's very real, and life is about love. So the path of love is not easy all the time, but it's the best one.
Absolutely. I like that, Mark. That's great. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure, and
thanks, Rashad.
Really interesting and deep thoughts and conversation today. I think I'm going to have to digest some of what we talked about. I hope that it's given our listeners some things to think about and to reflect
careful
on.
What you wish for. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks, Rashad.
Thanks for coming on. We'll talk again soon.
Okay.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, would you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share this with a friend. It spreads the word and helps the podcast grow. You can also find me on social media at R.E. Oberlander. Until next time, stay awesome.